Heyo, Patrick, how you doing, bud?
Not too bad at all, buddy. So, what have you for me today?
So we were watching Natasha Hausdorff and others on international law, the ICC, UN Council, General Council, and the Security Council, what powers they have, what they don't, what they've indicated is good or bad. So we have Normal America with Rob Noor, but he has Ryan Mullally, and it's on Not One Step Back, it's the name of the program. And it's the international applications as it applications as it relates to the United States of America and others, right?
Right.
So we're wondering why certain kinds of things get passed by the General Council for the UN and the Security Council, who has votes, who doesn't, and what the implications are and what that means. So we'll go ahead and kick this thing off, let these fellas talk, and then we can do some analysis. Sound good?
Yes. Very, very interesting, actually.
All right, Patrick, here we go.
But listen, I have been reliably told by a bunch of people with the exact same legal background as me, which is zero, that this is a grotesque violation of international law. And so this is going to diminish the United States stature.
Okay.
Could you talk for a minute? Like, I've seen 3 or 4 different type laws specifically. In fact, I won't say specifically, generically suggested violations of international law. Can you talk a little about just international law in general in situations like this, and then anything you want to talk about the specifics of what you've heard people suggesting this would violate?
There is a general consensus that a thing is either good or bad. And like Mr. Noor is saying, they don't know what they're talking about functionally, right? Because they're saying generally a thing is not legal per UN sanctioned councils or whatever. But what they're not identifying is specifically what has happened to cause the violation, what rule or article in the creation of the UN and the rules and doctrines we're supposed to follow, where something has gone awry or wrong.
I think the problem with most people is when they hear, they don't quite understand what international law is to begin with,
Right.
and what completely wild statements can be made around international law.
Right.
The general rule of thumb is you can attack another country in self-defense, but not aggressively attack them.
But the problem is then, is the other country bound by the UN Charter or not?
Technically, they're supposed to be bound by international law, but most people know that it's not going to happen. They're not going to be sanctioned too badly in the UN. There might be a general vote and so on,
Right.
but if it's against any of the major powers, permanent members, they can just veto any vote straight away.
And especially those on the Security Council. That's why Israel gets more sanctions than anyone else. But they're done by the general, not the Security Council, so it carries no weight. They just say, we don't like what you did, and okay, cool, you don't like it, do something. And they're like, we can't, and they stomp their foot and nothing happens.
Yeah, and that's the problem. There's no teeth behind it. Has Israel broken international law? Numerous times they have. On paper they have. But is there going to be any enforcement past a sanction? No.
Well, if they would actually have some kind of functional hearing and say, this is the thing that they did wrong, and they could say, okay, so maybe we acted in an immoral, illegal fashion, then what do you do? Again, no teeth. And
there's no teeth behind it.
And there's lots of countries in Africa that have violated that severely with massive genocides, Rwanda and other places. And you don't see a sanction there. There's been some sanctions against, say, North Korea. But again, that's a totalitarian dictatorship, and they don't care. Like, what are you going to do?
Yes.
Come here and do something about it? Again, no teeth. So we'll let the counselor here, Mr. Mullally, address that. But I think it was a good conceptually thing for us to give it a little more breadth, right?
Yes.
What people are talking about is that in the UN Charter, there's basically a guarantee that we made it illegal post-World War II for countries to aggress on other countries. That's what the law says. We're going to circle back to that. But even if you take that law at 100% face value, which I'll do for the moment, it has an exception, which is called Article 51, which is self-defense. And if you listen to what Trump was saying about these drug boats for months and months and months and months and months, he was talking about the drugs being a form of terrorism against the United States and invoking our right of self-defense. Why was he doing that, especially in retrospect? Well, now he has a clean runway from an international law perspective. So that would be the argument in terms of international law. It won't matter at all. And here's why. International law is enforced by 2 bodies as a legal matter. the UN and the International Court, the ICC, which is governed by the Rome Statute. Let's talk about each of them. In the UN, there's the General Assembly, which has no power to do anything under any circumstances ever. So let's rule them out.
So they can make whatever proclamations and sanction and say whatever they're going to say, except again, no teeth. It is not going to do the thing.
But the teeth behind the UN is you get a bunch of countries like what's happening with Israel. I'm just going to use them as an example. They got sanctioned by the UN with no power, but the power came when they started doing trade sanctions against them, individual countries involved in that vote. So
Right.
there is a certain amount of power that the UN can wield when it comes to like the trade and so on that can hurt a country's economy.
To remove their
Try to get them
legal
back
ability to support their constituents and their citizens.
Their
Makes
ability
sense.
to wage war and so on. So there is soft power there. It's a good meeting place for multiple countries to meet up and say, such and such a country is completely out of bounds. I think we should all come together and sanction them with trade. It's probably the quickest and easiest way.
Be the most effective way, right?
Then there's UN peacekeeping forces, which are governed by the Security Council. And China, Russia, and the United States are permanent members of the Security Council with veto power over anything the Security Council does.
Any sanction or anything that's going to be levied against those three nations, the United States, China, or Russia, can be vetoed. And one veto vote in the Security Council means we're not going to do the thing, right? Which means those three superpowers can functionally play the game however they like, but it should keep things more normalized. But it's not playing out that way in a lot of instances with Russia going into Ukraine.
That well because anytime you see the likes of Israel trying to be sanctioned, the US shoots it down straight away. Straight away. There might be a vote in the General Council, but the minute it hits the security desk, as they would say, it's the US vetoes us.
And then there's the internal issues in China where there have been sanctions, and there's actions by Russia that have been sanctioned, the Ukraine issue, things like that, right? So, but those three powers are inviolate because they can just say, no, it isn't a 6-3 or a 7-2. It's a 8-1 or 9-1, whatever it is. If the one says no, it's vetoed.
It's vetoed straight away.
Right.
That's a very important key. That's a very important key that people should understand is the US doesn't just protect its own interests, it also protects its allies as well. So if any of their allies step out of line, they usually veto us straight away.
Right. It's the same with Russia and China, but that ends up with lots of proxy wars because the big boys can't play, but the smaller ones can attempt to iterate. They can attempt to iterate in that space.
So there is no universe in which the UN can ever move against the United States for a perceived violation of international law, flat stop. It is impossible because the US will just veto it. Same with Russia, same with China. People have this false impression that international law was designed to create a system of co-equal countries that all operated like the same way we would in our legal system. This is just not true.
It is the fact that that is not true because those three countries having a veto power. Then understand anyone else on the Security Council while they're on the council also has that same veto power, whatever the country might be it Poland or Eritrea or Vietnam, it doesn't matter. If they're on the council at the time, they can also cast that negative vote to ensure that whatever the thing is in front, whatever the sanction is in front of the Security Council is just shot down. Right. So there's a lot of jockeying for position in that space.
What it was designed to do was to keep the great powers from fighting each other and to create a system which would let the great powers operate within their spheres of influence and reduce chaos. There is no mechanism where this could get enforced. Any violation of international law could get enforced against
In the United States, we're running a play called the Monroe Doctrine, where we're attempting to keep other foreign powers out of the Western Hemisphere. Europe is doing much the same in Europe. Russia is doing much the same in Russia, and China and China.
Yes.
So what's happening is we are picking our soccer field, our football field, whatever you want to call it, baseball diamond, and we're saying, this is where we play, y'all stay out. So the big boys are basically hammering smaller countries into factionalism in these spaces.
And it's interesting to see them, especially in the last, say, 18 months, they see how the big boys are interacting with each other and with the world in general, but especially with the US. It's an interesting play. Does it work in the modern world is a question that should be asked. Because everyone's trade is so intertwined, not quite working out that well for the United States. Especially when it comes to, say, the Straits of Hormuz at the moment, where it's not making them friends, is the nicest way of putting it.
But what it's looking like is that the United States is attempting to lock all of the oil. They made a massive deal with the Secretary of War and Malaysia to block certain kinds of delivery coming up through that space, trying to block out Hormuz, taking away Venezuela as a possibility for oil. It looks like a big play. And then you have China very unhappy about it, but they're doing things in Taiwan, which isn't formally recognized by lots of people. Lots of international
but I think the
entities.
difference is China is one of the few that hasn't for a very long time invaded other countries or bombed other countries.
Well, they are having an issue with India right now, and that has to do with water rights and
they always have a bit of a fractured relationship there.
The hills on the northern side of India near Mongolia and all that stuff. So
yes, but the difference is they're not sending carrier task forces around the world bombing countries. There's a big difference between China, say, and China's policy and, say, the US policy or even Russia's policy.
But at the end of the day,
out of
they're
all
acting,
the three major powers there.
Right. Well, they're all acting in what they assume is their own best self-interest. But it seems to be disconnected from the people of their countries as well in many cases.
Basically at all. And the ICC is even funnier. We can get to that in a second.
All right. So on to the next section. Here we go. Let's listen to Mr. Mullally.
There's no better example of this than, sometimes people say stuff like, Bush is a war criminal. We should arrest Bush. Trump's a war criminal. We should arrest Trump. Biden's a war criminal even. They're all war criminals. Arrest them. And there's this really funny law that I encourage everyone to look up. It's called the American Service Members Protection Act. And if anybody wants to talk to you about arresting Americans by the ICC, this is the thing to point out. We passed a law in this country that says if an American is ever arrested by the ICC, because we are not a party to that treaty, they have no jurisdiction to arrest Americans. If they ever arrest an American, the president has standing authorization to invade Europe and by all necessary means take the Americans back. That's what we think of the International Court. Like,
we functionally don't recognize that body as having jurisdiction over the United States in any way. So we made a law that says we can just go get them and we're going to take them and you don't get to have them at all, regardless of opinions about violations of the Geneva Convention, which we are a part of. In fact, every military ID in the United States is issued with your Geneva Convention category 1, 2, 3, whatever your category is. And that's functionally used as how many of your guys are we going to trade for how many of our guys, right? But the problem is countries don't observe the Geneva Convention. They can't do anything about them either, right? So it becomes nonsensical when you have countries that don't fight wearing uniforms, and if they're in violation, obviously in violation, but there's nothing that the Geneva Convention can really do to them except say, you're outside of our thing and we don't like that you're doing that. And they say, hey, buzz off. We're going to do what we do.
And that's what his main point is.
Yes.
International law is a great set of rules if everyone plays by those rules. But there's no way of enforcing them. There's no teeth behind it. As I said, the UN is a great institution in principle. But if the UN had more teeth, it'd be far more effective.
But that's a kind of a bureaucracy that could really lead to bad things on the international scale if it were given more teeth.
Yes and no, I think, personally. If the UN had teeth, would it put manners on a lot of other countries? Maybe. But it'll never put manners, like, no matter how much power the UN has, it'll never be able to, say, sanction any of the major powers.
It can't
that would
because
never
of the
happen.
veto power.
Yes.
That would be China, Russia, and the United States, or they don't have to play ball by the same rules everybody else does. No. Yes. Because they're the established superpowers functional.
Like, we are not beholden to them, and we shouldn't be. This is America's view of all these institutions. We do not let international bodies tell us what to do. This is the mistake Europe made. In Europe, when they sign a treaty, it's binding law. They're bound by it. In America, we like to keep international law separate from our legal system for good reason.
That means that there isn't a schism between international law and the Constitution. The Constitution says this is a right afforded to the individual, but then there's a dictate from some other entity that is international in nature that says, Well, Americans don't get that right, because then that right, the violation of their right could extend to U.S. soil, and then it is violent of our judicial system.
Yeah, it's interesting when you see the way, say, the EU, for example, operates when it comes to international law. They usually the EU usually tries to follow or stay within international law as best they can. A lot of the UN countries, but it's interesting to see an American's point of view that it's more of a guideline than a rule in a lot of ways.
Well, not so much a guideline. We don't want our civil rights to be violated from an international source. And you'll notice, like, even in the
basically, they
EU,
don't like being told what to do.
But there's countries inside the EU, like Poland. Poland says, we're not taking any immigrants. We're just not going to do it. And they're getting sanctioned by the EU Council. You have to do it. And they say, no, we'll pay whatever the money is per day. We're just not going to do that. We want to keep our culture inviolate. We want to be the Poles. We don't want to be the Poles and lots of other interests that are not our interests. They're not in the interest of Poland to do the thing. So they just end up paying money because they're fined every day for not doing the thing that they've been demanded to do. And the response is, we have a culture, we want to keep the culture, which is the American view. We want the culture, we want to keep the culture. We don't want international law affecting the inalienable rights of our citizenry.
Okay.
It makes sense to me. Of course, I'm an American, so it would make sense to me.
And I don't think we're wrong to do it, but the idea that any president's going to be arrested for war crimes is laughable. It's a joke.
So the two things I have to say about it, right? One, the international law I hear the most, and when I'm debating, is asylum law. Mm-hmm. Wow, you can't turn away these asylees. You can't turn it. Yeah, I don't care about that. I don't care what the ICC says about that. I don't care what the EU says about that. If we in the United States say we want to set our own immigration policy, and that means we're not going to accept people that claim that they are seeking asylum, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with saying we don't care. Then fine, send your military after us, ICC. How about you take these people? That's number one. Number two is, just think of it from simple game theory. So, like, look at the position of the United States circa, like, 1990, after the Cold War, right? United States, clear hegemon. You don't think that the international community, if it was, like, a pure one-for-one vote, wouldn't have incentive to be like, well, let's take them down a peg, right? Like, we can't do it economically. We can't do it militaristically. We'll all go together, and it doesn't even matter if we're morally right. We'll just say, actually, United States, you have to listen to us, and there's more of us than you. And we're not going to do it in, like, a just way. We're going to do it in an advantageous way in game theory for us. So, of course, it would make no sense for the United States to say, sure, I guess if the international community says that, for example, something as simple as this, if the international community says...
It's a violation of sovereignty issue there, is I believe what he's talking about. Like, you cannot violate my sovereignty with military action or even making decisions where you foist something upon us that we don't want to accept.
Yes, but I think that what most people in the UN and a lot of the international community is America's very much of, we're not going to follow your rules. I'm going to put this in a nice way.
A decorum, maybe? A decorum?
I think the way especially the way the US is acting at the moment around the international community, is probably outside of international law, but just the way they are acting in general at the moment is not making them any friends in the European Union or in the UN or anywhere else.
Right, and it would have teeth if there was a veto vote that couldn't be made by the US.
I think the best vote, I always said the best way to hurt any country is economically. It's the quickest and fastest way to cripple a country.
Well, Ireland, the UK, and the United States are being hammered by that right now. We have uncontrolled immigration. I mean, they're working on it, but that seems to be having a ton of economic migrants that don't want to assimilate seems to be the best way to cause conflict internally in a country. And that is an economic problem when you have economic migrants that are going for asylum status. Then you say, hey, you've got to go, and then they don't go, and then they're still there, and they're not assimilating. And it creates an even bigger problem as it exacerbates.
Besides that, what I'm saying is, the biggest bully at the moment around the world is the United States, especially the way they doesn't know any international law, any international treaty, any international border by the looks of it.
But the thing is, China and Russia are playing the same game.
They're playing the same game.
Yeah, they're all, and it's because they have the veto votes. They can just say, no, we're going to run the play the way we want to run it, and you guys can just stuff it. We're going to do the thing we do, and if you don't like it, well, send somebody over to tell me to stop.
Yes. And as I said, the best way to deal with this problem is just sanctions. Just sanction the living daylights out of them. Because guess what? Soldiers have a tendency not to fight that well when they're not getting paid. And I think if the UN had any backbone or any spine, they would have come together a long time ago to put some rules in place for the major powers.
You mean the ones where Russia, China, and the United States have a veto vote where it would matter?
I think they shouldn't have a veto vote. If the UN ever wanted to be taken seriously, they would remove the veto powers, but they won't.
They can't because they don't have the veto power.
Is that our companies such as X or the New York Times can't operate in their countries as long as we have, quote, free speech. Well, that's international law. We have to abide by that. Of course not. We'd say
that's a big sticking point right there. Free speech should be a thing. And in the marketplace of ideas, if an idea is a bad idea, we debate about it, figure it out, and figure out what a good compromise is. But there should be a compromise when it comes to free speech. There just shouldn't be.
I think the French put it a very, very easy way to X. If you don't like the way we do business, you don't have to do business here.
Totally acceptable. But
and Elon Musk sat down and guess what? He followed the rules.
I think there were some free speech things that were accepted total platform-wise for them to continue to do that, because the money that France would have lost on the back end of them coming out wouldn't have been good either. But that's...
But at the end of the day, every country operates, well, the EU operates as well as individual countries operate.
I still
Look
don't
at Australia.
I see Australia, but what I'm saying is I don't see why there needs to be a bureaucratic layer over the top of all of you, because you're not like states in the United States. You are separate countries. And I don't know why Brussels can say, Ireland, you have to do this thing, and you're functionally bound to do it. And if you don't do it, then they make you pay money. The same thing with Poland. You are not letting in a bunch of people that will not culturally assimilate, so we will punish you. And they say, fine, we'll pay the money. But the fine shouldn't have been levied in the first place, because the EU Council should not have been able to tell Poland, you have to take people into your country that violate your sovereignty and affect your economics in a negative way.
Let's take Poland, for example. They always, a lot of Eastern European countries have butt heads, but that's just the nature of any large body like the EU. You're going to have countries that will operate and go off and do their own trick, as they would say, which is fair enough. Poland's more entitled to do it. But they're also entitled to leave the EU if they're not happy. But they won't do that. We understand in Europe we're better together than separate. Because we don't want to end up like the UK, for instance, darkly being crippled by their closest ally because they're not playing ball. We don't want to be in an individual country beholden to the whims of somebody else. We're better together than separate.
We're still at the whims of the EU. And when it comes to the UK, their immigration has gone wildly out of control.
The United Kingdom's no longer part of the European Union.
No, I understand that because of Brexit. What I'm saying is that a lot of economic migrants get forced even from those first world countries, France, Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, and they get pushed into the EU's open zone, which is the UK, which is no longer part of it. And then they end up in Ireland. They just get pushed to North Ireland and they go down into Ireland. And since you're the nearest EU country,
and at the moment, our immigration service is ramping up, and we are doing deportations.
I hope so, and
we just don't broadcast it. I know people who work in that space, and yes, there is a lot of deportations happening.
I really hope so.
That's the First Amendment for a reason. We don't care. You don't get to do that to us. You don't get to try to say that we're violating international law by allowing hate speech. So, yeah, I have no time of day for these claims of international law. Are there things that I think that international law proclaims that we should follow? Of course, but not necessarily because they're international law, because I find them morally virtuous. Mm-hmm. Like, we shouldn't just torture surrendering prisoners for the heck of it, and things like that. Of course, even if we would never be, sanctioned by an international court, we shouldn't do that. Because it's wrong, but it's not because the international court tells us to.
And I'm not saying international law does nothing. It actually does quite a good deal. Like what public international law does is for the non-great powers. Like if you're a small country in Africa or South America and you start invading your neighbor, the UN actually will show up with peacekeeping forces and make you stop. Right? Like
that's the teeth. But it's the teeth on the little guys, not on the big guys. They regulate those kinds of behaviors and those kinds of violations of sovereignty, except it seems to miss internally in some countries, again, like Rwanda, where there was a massive genocide, almost 1 million people.
Yes, there was UN security force there at the time.
They were ineffectual. When almost 1 million people died, then
as I said, they were badly outnumbered at the time. But the UN does have, as he was pointed out there, they do have security forces they can deploy. to all these different hotspots if they choose to do that.
Yeah, if it's a
But
small,
not against the major, but not against the major superpowers.
right? If it's a small incursion, then they
Or
can
their
go
allies.
there and go, hey guys, come on now, play nice.
Like there was even a UN resolution where they wanted to send peacekeeper forces into Gaza that time. Of course, that got absolutely shot down straight away.
Immediately.
But, yeah.
For smaller, non-great powers, this is enforceable. So that's different. For the great powers, it's what you were talking about right now, which is it's a valuable rhetoric tool for gathering sympathy and for mobilizing shame, right? So when Russia invades Ukraine, we know we can't use the Security Council, but we're going to say, look, they violated the UN Charter, they violated international law, and Russia's going to say, no, we didn't. And that's going to be the conversation that either gets people to be sympathetic or not, right?
Right. It spurns on the conversation with the superpowers. Hey, you're acting a little out of hand here, bud. Come on now, get out of there. And Russia still controls what is considered to be Ukrainian land in Crimea and the Donbass and places like that, where they're still occupying the space because it is considered to be Ukrainian land, but it is owned and controlled by Russia.
As I said, the invasion there of the Ukraine it was interesting to see the international response afterwards, especially from the major superpowers. Like China does what China does best. It usually just sit in the fence and see how it plays out. The US was supporting Ukraine up to recently, but it's just interesting that there was no major UN response, is the best way I could describe it.
Right. Well, even in the general, it didn't go very far.
With Venezuela, this is a bad guy. He did bad things. Now, what's the enforcement mechanism for the US? It's going to be whether or not China does something about this, like, because they're the communist power. Are they going to sanction us? Are they going to make a diplomatic fuss out of this? That would be the enforcement mechanism. And that's the truth. Like China's.
It'd be a moral grandstanding thing is what it would be. I don't think you're doing right. And then whatever sanctions they attempt to impose upon the United States from there. But understanding again,
China did send very angry letters about it, but that was about it.
They didn't get too aggressive, honestly.
They didn't know, because there's too much money on both sides of the equation there between China and the US. They have too much of a interlinked trade at the moment.
Right, it's a logistics
so
issue.
They're not going to upset the apple cart too much either side.
China hasn't invaded Taiwan not because it's illegal. They haven't invaded Taiwan because we've made it clear that we have a very serious problem with that.
Yes,
right.
I'm not going to listen. Let me make this as clear as possible. Despite the fact that I don't like what happened with what Trump did in Venezuela there, I'm not going to listen to international bodies that were perfectly fine with the deposing of Gaddafi in Libya tell me that this was somehow a violation of international law, and that wasn't. Like, they have no credibility with me. I understand what the game is.
Oof, that's a giant can of worms right there. The Muammar Gaddafi thing. If they didn't say, hey, you need to stop that and fix yourself immediately on that one, and then they have a problem with Venezuela, then
everybody kind of had to understand this is not a nice guy. So,
yes,
we're going to handle it. We're going to handle the business.
We got this. Don't worry. We're good. Yeah.
Yeah. So, international special forces went over, a couple of different special forces groups from around the world went over and helped him to be removed. That's the best way I could describe that.
They gave the good assist.
They gave very good assist.
Well, they kicked it over to the other fellow to kick the goal.
But
right?
I think I do agree with him. I think it's hypocritical to criticize the United States for doing what they did in Venezuela. Because this guy was not a nice man. Don't get me wrong. The current leader, she's not a very nice lady. But,
oh, no.
She can play ball.
She's playing ball. She's playing ball. So, yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, I know she was, head of the murder squads and whatever else. But,
the conversation soldiers is my buddy Patrick likes to call them.
Soldiers. Well, what I'm saying is, I do agree with him. It is hypocritical of these international bodies criticizing the United States for doing this. Now, if they were serious about it, there's plenty of tools in their toolbox they could use against the United States, but they won't do that either. No. They'll send angry letters.
Well, and they're very angry and they're very lettery, so it's good.
Serious people just trying to advocate for justice regardless of, wearing team colors. That's not what's going on. So I could dislike this action and still say international law has nothing to do with my criticism of this action whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's very, I understand people come into a show at different times and things of that nature. But make no mistake about it, you're allowed to support or dislike something and say, but part of the arguments that people were making, I completely disagree. So the international law portion of it, I just find it's silly. It's not going to do anything. You might as well be an old man screaming at the sky. Like it's not going to have any effect.
I think the people complaining fundamentally misunderstand your position. So let me just try to make this like very, very clear. This is not my politics, but if I put on your politics for a second, you're an anti-globalist and a non-interventionist, right?
Correct.
So you don't like intervention because you're a non-interventionist, and you don't like international law dictating what the U.S. does and doesn't do because you're not a globalist. So,
correct.
This is not, I don't think there's any contradiction in that position, right? You don't like it because of domestic political implications, not because of some kind of like international legal theory.
That is a great way to distill it.
That's a pretty interesting point. Not a globalist and don't intervene in my business. And lots of countries are... Yeah, get off my lawn, bro. Like, no, like, leave it alone. And then for an outside entity to dictate to Mr. Noor what it is he can and cannot do, he finds that insufferable. Do not violate my rights. Just don't be that. Don't do that. And don't say you have some kind of power over me because of some international jurisdictional thing you're going to shove in my face. We just don't accept it.
But do you think the U.S. would ever change its policies?
As far as Monroe Doctrine, or as far as
what? The Monroe Doctrine, for example. Do you think they will ever change our policy?
Sapphire grass is what we're going to stick with, I'm pretty sure. Like, this is our space. We want to control the trade routes. We want to make sure that the United States' ability to continue to function where they're functioning is inviolate. But it also creates these kinds of internal strife issues that we have as well. Certain kind of voting blocks and certain kind of satisfaction of groups that don't really assimilate or don't want to assimilate. So we end up on an international scale making very strange decisions, at least at the state level.
Do you think they would ever listen to if the UN, how can I put it? Well, they can't sanction, but if there was a UN resolution against the United States, how would you think they would react to it? Just ignore it?
They'd veto it. It would be dead before it hit the floor. It just wouldn't happen. But if something else, well, it's because in the General Council, they'll make all kinds of wild accusations. But the Security Council is where the business is happening. It's where the ability to have any kind of teeth at all will come from.
Yeah.
To send peacekeeping forces or any other kind of sanction or issue or problem. That's where it's going to happen. So if you have the ability to say, even though I'm acting wrong, I can vote no, then it's a no vote and it's vetoed and it's done. All right. Anything more for the good of the people, Patrick?
No. As I said, that was interesting, actually. Something a bit different, as they would say.
Well, I wanted to give some perspective on the things. We said we'd get back to it, or the Oxford Union debates where we were watching Natasha Hausdorff and all those folks have a discussion. And I figured it was about time that we came through on it. All right. For Patrick McCallum, I am Alex Johansson. Like the ring the bell, do all the things, and subscribe. Help us beat the algorithm. For the A&P Gents, we are